To stop the music. Sorry to stop the music, but we got to get going. We brought so many photos for you. And my name is Sade Gabrias, and welcome to Museum of the African Diaspora's newest program, which is Art as We See It. Right now, it's not really that new, I guess. My name is Sade, and I'm with my colleagues Dimitri, Remy, Charlie, Aswan, Nicole, and Kitson. And we're pretty excited to bring you photos, family photos. And beforehand, I just want to say that MoAD's physical building may be closed due to the mandatory shelter in place, but you can still get your fill of art and artists of the African diaspora. Every other Thursday at 2 p.m. PST, we invite you to join MoAD Docents as we look at art with you with curiosity and wonder. We contextualize the art and discuss the artist, the art form with you, and say whatever wonderful thing that comes to our minds, because this is Art as We See It. We will follow all talks with an audience Q&A. And this week we're looking at family photos. And Bill Weathers' Grandma's Hands was a good segue to this. And in previous programs, we looked at daguerreotypes and baryotypes and tintypes and all kinds of type of photography, but we thought it was fitting for December, late December, to bring family photos to you. And these are all found in public domain. You can find these photos as well. We just curate them and bring them to you. What we love about this program is your participation. Please participate in the chat. Let us know what you think. And this is meant to be participatory. And before we start, I would like us to have a moment of silence as we stand in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. Thank you. And as many of us are settler immigrants and descendants of those forcefully brought to this continent, our institutions are founded upon the exclusions and erasures of indigenous peoples whose land we are located. With deep respect, MoAD acknowledges that even in virtual space, our people, our work, and our network servers are on native lands. And thank the indigenous people of the Bay Area who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. If you are joining us from Facebook, we'll jump in and out of Zoom to get your chat. Please participate as much as you would if you were with us on Zoom. The first image that I would like to start with is actually a poster from 1940s. And this series is photos from mid to late 1800s to mid 1900s. And I particularly really like this photo. And this is from 1940s. And although it's not a photograph, I just wanted to show how that time was captured on this poster. And normally you would see this poster in business places, kind of, put in on the walls. And if we think about 1940s, what was happening, World War II, and we think about the GI Bill passing at that time and the Black family sort of starting to prosper and to see opportunities at time, but really thinking about also investing in their own communities. And this is in Harlem. And there is not much information that we can find when we search for Better Business League of America, but it is kind of it's very clearly stated on this poster what the intention is. It's sort of started again in 1960s, I want to say, or late 50s, is buy Black, think Black, buy Black. And it's sort of that idea at the beginning of it in Harlem. And so I just wanted to start that with that, and I hope it's okay with the docents that this is not a photo, but this is a poster. And so I love the photo of the family in the living room, and we're going to see all sorts of families or all kinds of families in the following. But also, we cannot start with, a photo exhibit of Black families without talking about Frederick Douglass. Dimitri, you want to take that away? You're muted.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Yes, of course. I mean, I feel like we have spent so much time talking about Frederick Douglass. And, oftentimes we don't think about his legacy beyond his own life. So here is a portrait of him and his grandson, Joseph Douglass. Also, not pictured, not shown here is the violin. And so Joseph Douglass was actually a very famous violinist. And interestingly enough, Joseph and his father learned to play violin from Frederick Douglass, who often was said to, when he was having a difficult time, would lock himself in his room and play violin until his mind was right. So Joseph Douglass also became the first American violinist of any race to record a record with Victor. So if folks remember the old records, Victor is a very, very famous company. And I didn't even notice until we zoomed in. It almost looks like his tie pin looks like a violin. It wasn't until you zoomed in closer onto that. And the first time that he publicly performed was at the Chicago World's Fair, also known as the Columbia World's Fair. That was co-organized by Fannie Lou Hamer and Frederick Douglass. And this was his debut on the world stage. Joseph also spent time as a tenured professor of music at Howard University. So he has also several famous students that he taught music at Howard as well. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I'm missing on this. Oh, his wife's name was Fanny, and she was a famous pianist who also accompanied him. And they lived in a neighborhood, the U Street corridor in Washington, D.C., which was called the Black Broadway, and Duke Ellington was one of his neighbors. So fun little trivia fact about Joseph.
You can always count on Dimitri for this historical facts, but I also want to, I love the furniture. Can you talk a little bit about the furniture? Can we talk about it? I also would like to invite the participants to say something about the fashion and the furniture design. As I'm thinking that's a lion kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think the lion motif, and I feel like you should just go on with that. I think what we agreed, we saw several. This one image was part of a series of photographs, because we all know Frederick Douglass is the most photographed. Was he just the most photographed person in the 19th century period? And how important the image was to him. So this was one of several photographs. So if you Google search them, you'll find several in public archives from the same photo shoot that we know is from a photo studio. But yeah, you make choices when you go to the photo studio, right? Like, it's not just the photographer that's like, you're gonna sit on this chair with this prop. You get to, just as of right now, make some choices. So Frederick Douglass and the lion chair is definitely speaks to his personality.
Yeah. And it's in his later years, I think, Frederick Douglass, at least, his photo.
Oh, Remy, we can't hear you for some reason.
Remy, yeah, for some reason we can't hear you, Remy. Remy, are you muted? I think you might be muted.
I can imagine that chair has claws at the bottom, probably.
Yeah, we saw on, you know, on the other photo we looked at, we saw claws at the bottom, like it's the feet. The feet were claws. I don't know if you can see it in this photo. Oh yeah, there it is. Yeah. Yeah, and on the table. Yeah.
I also want to just kind of bring in, you know, Shelley says that she is a violinist and so happy to learn about Douglas's violin connection. V says the chair's the bomb.
Yeah.
And Kevin B has visited the Douglas home in DC, which is in the Anacostia neighborhood, just to point out for folks.
Dimitri, I'm going to give you this one as well. What do you think?
Okay, I guess I could jump into this one as well. And so, yeah, so this photograph, kind of my first observations about this photograph is when you go to UC Berkeley, throughout several of the buildings, there's images of the early days of the Berkeley and Oakland area. And so for me, that I immediately had made this connection with this photograph of like, there's so many pictures of white families that look like this. And you don't really see images of Black families in, you know, dressed finely and in a field. This photograph is part of a body of photographs taken between 1899 and 1900 and organized by W.E.B. Du Bois for the Paris Exposition. So here's a little like juicy facts and secrets about the Paris Exposition. So, you know, it's interesting that you did this one right after the Joseph Douglas image because African Americans were excluded from that exposition pretty much entirely. There was just, even though it was in Chicago, post-emancipation, and there was only one day because of pressure by the Black community to put this one day that was dedicated to Black history. And so the organizers of the Paris Exposition did not want to make that same mistake because, you know, Paris is progressive or France is progressive. And so in a 4-month period, him and his team went and photographed African-American life, predominantly focusing on Georgia. You know, W.B. Du Bois was teaching at what's now Clark Atlanta University. And so they wanted to show and document how African-American life had changed since emancipation. And so he really focused on, you know, the middle class and upper middle class and folks who lifted themselves by their bootstraps at the time, you know, that were self-educated and self-made and wealthy. So here we have this image of which I assume is a multi-generational family with, you know, the father figure and what I would assume is the mother. We don't know who these people are exactly. They weren't included. Du Bois collected hundreds of images to represent. And this was really, this image was part of showing the entire world, because everyone attended the World's Fairs, the entire world, the progress that African Americans had made. And so, yeah, it's just a beautiful, beautiful photograph. There's a conversation going on, but yeah, they did this in 4 months. And I think folks, like every couple of years, Du Bois's charts, he make these graphs to show kind of the trajectory and history of African-American life and showing significant events, and those come out. These were, for folks who are familiar with the graphs and charts, this image would have been accompanied with the charts of achievements. And somebody else can go into fashion, the fashion of this.
Yeah. I'm also wondering, seeing photos outside, also, I'm wondering if anyone's going to comment on that, but yes.
Actually, Julie responded and said most of those. She spoke of she enjoyed seeing photos of the families during that period, Black families, and that she had quite a few photos. Today, I think you asked her if they were taken outside as well, and she said yes, most of them were.
I wonder if that speaks to the technology. I think you had more freedom probably with the camera at this time. And you could take pictures outside and have it look nice as opposed to in a studio. Does that make sense?
I'm not a photo historian, but I know we've had them on and photo experts for this time period. I know in 1900, the Brownie camera became available. So then you start to see more snapshots, but this is obviously not a snapshot. But I think, you know, prior to Kodak releasing the Brownie camera, they had also come up with a much faster film. So you no longer had to have the, you know, the 20-second exposures. You could get a photograph taken closer to what we do at this time. And that's in my reading of this is why, you know, we don't see so much blurring like in a previous one where we saw the trees had clearly been blowing in the wind and kind of left the trail. You don't see that here. So I'm assuming it's a much faster shutter speed and film speed, but I'm not a photo historian.
And outside, I think I agree with Julie too, that, you know, outside lighting was easier at the time as well, daylight.
I think also we're starting to see, oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, okay. Remy. We're good.
I think one of the things that I noticed that we're starting to see when we start to look at this period as well is we're starting to see more of mood being created by people looking at different directions. We're starting to see more, rather than everybody just looking at the photographer and the photographer's point of view of the people, we start to see the people looking in different directions, and then by looking in a different direction, telling their own mini story within the photograph.
And I want to do a correction since this is now going to be public record. It was actually Ida B. Wells. I said Fannie Lou Hamer. I don't, you know, the powerful women. It was Ida B. Wells, for the record, who protested not having Black folks represented in the Chicago Expo.
We forgive you, Dimitri. And I also want to say, you know, that talking about fashion and looking at these photos, it's just the bow tie of the little boy and the adult man. I'm assuming that's the dad. And just looking at, you know, I think Dimitri, you pointed out the little hat hanging on the you know, on the child's knee. And so I wanted to see like how, you know, in the last 2 or 3 weeks that we've seen different types of fashion come into, and this is late into 1800s. And so, yeah, I want to know how people are seeing this. And yeah, the hat is new to me. That shape of hat, yeah.
And the skirts are a lot smaller in terms of the circumference around. Some of the other skirts were a lot fuller with, you know, some kind of petticoat situation. I don't know how else to say that. Some kind of petticoat situation going on underneath. We still have the high collars and the long sleeves. So we still have this whole idea of modesty and moderation, but we're starting to see a little bit more frill as well, which I think is another way of saying I'm fancy, I'm decorated, I'm adorning myself with these frilly edges as well. It's a lot softer looking. We're seeing a lot softer looking images as well.
Yeah. Do we see a water reflected in the back, way in the back? Is that just me?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was water or whether it was light coming through the bottom of the trees.
Yeah.
Could be water.
Could be water.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so moving on to the same kind of tone, this photo has the same kind of lighting and the same kind of tone. Oh, I see that V is saying, I'm mindful of the different hair textures. The older woman's hair is wavy. The younger woman's hair, the young woman's hair is natural, very healthy looking. Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, that's a whole another talk.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic.
And we'll be back with it. We'll be back
we will be handling hair and what those products, you know. So for me, this one, I think what I find interesting about this particular photograph as well is that people are starting to present buildings and their homes in which they live as well. And from this one, again, that familiar diasporic activity of sitting on a porch is going on. But we start to see clearly from this picture, we start to see clearly the windows are open. So that makes me feel like that it's at least warm, or there's air needs to be circulated into the house as well. And just how clear this photograph in terms of lighting and the clouds, you know, the details, the very skinny twigs of trees, which really are not bearing very much fruit. And then this family sitting on the porch with the children, and what looks to might be maybe grandmama in the back in the corner wearing her hat. I love this photograph because I feel like it has so many elements. We have the people, we have the house, we have the metal of the fence, this telephone pole, or what, I don't know what you call it. I call them telephone poles. Sorry, English to English translation sometimes is
English to
I get a little caught. You know, this telephone pole right in the middle of the photograph, but it starts to tell us again something about time and construction of towns and cities and neighborhoods of that time.
And when you mentioned the porch, Remy, also it was sort of a form of communication. Your neighbors would come out, say in the summertime, and sit on a porch. It was a way to get to know your neighbors as well. Definitely looks like wintertime though. Cold
It does.
there. And there was something here, electric pole. And this was also a photo, was a part of Du Bois' presentation at the World's Fair. World's Fair.
Yeah, and I just think also just know we had this conversation about, you know, posing in front of a house, you know, and what does that tell you about someone? You know, this is a big, fine Victorian house. And so, yeah, and even like you said, if that's an electric or telephone pole, we can, you know, now we know that they have that technology where they live. And so it's like, you know, I just think like the Jeffersons, they've moved on up. Maybe not to the east side, but you know, they've definitely moved up, and it's telling that whole story of, you know, during, you know, previous to emancipation. I mean, there certainly were free Black folks at that time, but you know, the number of them at the turn of the last century who could now start to afford a house that's probably not built by their own hands is pretty significant.
Yeah. You know, one of the things also just looking at this photo is, one is the lighting and how it contributes to how I'm really happy with seeing the lines, and the lighting does such a great job in this photo, so where it's very satisfying to see all the intersecting lines, all the lines that are leading our eyes all over the place. And of course, Remy, you mentioned the cloud. That's debatable, right? Like, I don't know. I know. That's too perfect for me.
It could have been.
Yeah.
Early Photoshop. I don't know.
Early photo, exactly. And you know, that's great. And I'm so excited about the next photo because of the sheer contrast. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to show something before we leave this photograph that I just saw, is that we start to see the cobbled street as well at the front. And so again, the formation of roads and streets and stuff like that. And I haven't seen cobbled streets since I left England, so.
Yeah. Where is this? Where did you mention where this was?
It was mentioned.
So it will be Atlanta, right? Because if it's part of Du Bois, he focused on Georgia. So I mean, I'm assuming Atlanta because it may not be Atlanta, but
that's also why I assumed that it was hot, because the windows were open. And I was just like,
you know what, it is because it's that collection is documenting photos life in Georgia. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, and we have this.
Yeah, that's good to know. We're also in Georgia here.
Okay.
Still in Georgia.
They have moved on up.
Well, we're not in Atlanta. We're in Thomasville, Georgia, which is on the Gulf. It's on the south of Georgia. And the time is 1895, as you can see. So slavery has ended. When I saw this, I wondered, do they own this or are they sharecroppers? And there are some cues, I would say, from this photo to suggest that they were probably sharecroppers because of the log cabin. You see the clearing of the field behind. This photographer, I'll describe as a Euro-American, had many pictures of agricultural life in Georgia. And there was another in a series that he did that showed an ox and a plow with a log cabin behind. I want to say, though, that this is interesting, and I don't think this depicted I would say it didn't represent the life of at the time, so-called Negro. There's a book called W.E.B. Du Bois' Data Portraits, Visualizing Black America, and he works with the Atlanta University to do surveys, do data on life in Georgia for Black Americans. 1875, the value of land owned by Georgia Negroes, that's how they title it, was 1.2 million. By 1899, it had grown to 4.2 million.
Oh, wow.
He profiles the acres of land owned by Negroes in Georgia. 1874, it was 340,000 acres. By 1899, it was over 1 million acres. In this particular region of Georgia at the time, there were close to 23,000 Black Americans who owned land. So this picture, I'm also, as it zooms in, I have questions, of course, of the subjects at the center. I wonder the dynamic, the space, if this really is a single family unit in the traditional sense. You have to think about, well, what do you mean by family? But I want to bring attention to the male subject at center. Just getting back to the data that I presented. At this time, males over 10, over 90% were agricultural laborers, farmers, planters, and laborers, general laborers. So I don't know how old this male subject is. He appears to be over 10. In fact, I think the title of this picture, which was given by the Smithsonian, I think, is man. I think they refer to him as a man, but I don't know. So I wonder, what is he doing here? Why is he with the baby? Many questions. Yeah. I'd be curious to hear what people think, if they think these are sharecroppers or maybe they own the land.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Nicole. That was so rich. Wow.
I'm interested in the dog as well. That they have this dog that obviously, our history with dogs, that's all I'm gonna say, of all sorts. But
oh, we lost you again, Remy.
Oh, you did? I'm sorry.
No, now you're back.
Okay.
Oh goodness, what happened?
Yeah, I think Kevin Kevin B is also saying like it looks like the size of the cabin. I'm guessing they're sharecroppers. And yeah, I also think it's just really important to look at you know, that they're in the Georgia forest behind them, and the cabin and even the fence are made from the logs that you can see right behind there. So I would assume that the house is right where some of these trees that made it were located.
Yeah, we mentioned sharecroppers, and for just to give an idea, could you tell us what sharecroppers are and how that came about?
We can talk about it a little bit.
Yeah.
So it was, okay, so slavery had ended, but yet king was still cotton. There's still demand, agricultural demand. So the plantation owner shifted to a wage labor system. So I don't even know how they would break it up. I guess former enslaved peoples were asked to work a tract of land, and in return or in exchange, they would have a place to live. But they also were required to pay, I don't know if it's interest, but it wasn't a completely equal situation. So that's, yeah.
They often had to pay for the supplies that they needed to exist. So if they couldn't grow it, you know, if they needed grain or these kinds of things, they would go to a place that the slave owner had, get their supplies, and that was deducted from whatever was going to be at the end of the year based on what they were able to grow and bring into, you know, to market, so to speak. So it was just a continuation of slavery. And the reason that, of course, it was successful is because once slavery happened, there was nowhere, there was nowhere for these people to go. Where were they going? They had no money, they had no skills, so they had to stay. And then, but they were free, so the plantation owners came up with this beautiful idea.
There was a comment.
Indentured servitude. That's what came next.
So sorry.
Us one, the chat you were saying?
Yeah, there was a comment from V. Harris, and her ancestors are from her or him, I'm not sure. Anyway, my ancestors are from Macon, Georgia. My great grandfather owned land and was a dealer in wood. With all the wood in this photo, that might have been the work of the head of the household. This man may not be the head of the household, is what they said. But I think that also people built their own places as well. When I went to Texas in the 60s, it was really a culture shock for me because I'm from the Bay Area. But people built their own houses. This is a different period, of course, but some of them would be very, in the rural areas, some of them would be out of materials they found nearby, you know, or close at hand. They're in the forest, I don't know. Anyway, I think it could be either or, but don't discount that there are communities that were self-determined. And
that is true. You know, I never thought this photo was gonna get this much time on but I'm so glad we're talking about this, and I hear that in the chat. The chat is really happening right now. As the late artist Beverly Patricia saying, the late artist Beverly Buchanan created homes in her work to show how people lived. It was called vernacular homes. They had skills but no money.
And I want to make that clear too. When I said they didn't have skills, what I meant is reading and writing.
Yeah.
Of course they had skills. They built the whole damn country. So of course they had skills, but they weren't allowed to get some of the advanced training, so to speak, that would allow them to go out in the world and open a bank account or, you know, all these things that now we take for granted.
Whew. Okay. Yeah. Well, let's move on to the next photo. I think, don't we have this one? I think. You better be ready for this.
I am so ready for this. Yeah, I love how you guys bring these photos and I get to learn about people I have never heard of. So this image is, and we had so many discussions about this, but I'm just like, I'm glad that I got to learn a little bit more about this. But this is the Faulkner family. The photograph is Senator Henry Hall Faulkner and his family. But I want to say it's just the family because his wife Margaret was also a powerhouse, and their little son in the middle. What was his name? Oh my God, Waldo, who's sitting in between them, was also a powerhouse. So Faulkner. Oh, and then we've got the dog down there, which is an awesome addition to the photo. But so I'm gonna just go through a quick history lesson. Just give me a couple seconds. This photograph was taken circa 1906, and I was just like, what was happening in the world in 1906? They were in the DC, or they were in South Carolina. Sorry. So September 1906, we had the Atlanta race riots, and then in December, Cornell students formed the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, which is the very first Black fraternity in the country at this time. And so these are things that they would have been aware of at that same time. So Henry Faulkner became a senator for his state, South Carolina, during Reconstruction. He also, oh, North Carolina, shoot. Got my Carolinas mixed up. Thank you so much for that. That's fine. And you know, so he was politically very influential. His wife Margaret was also highly influential, particularly around education policy. So you know, I have extra love for them, focusing on education. Henry started off as a teacher. He started off as a tutor, then a teacher, and then a principal. He was principal of several high schools in the area. And then both him and his wife were tenured professors at the North Carolina A&T. So both of them were powerhouses. And I'm a little sad that she's not mentioned in the photograph, you know, in the public records. She became the very first woman to supervise, to be the supervisor of the Guilford County Schools for African Americans. And yeah, together, both of them formed educational policy and for the entire state of North Carolina. They also were very strong advocates that if you worked really hard, you got education, you were frugal, you didn't drink, you didn't smoke, because of their religious beliefs, that you could rise up above your position. I want to like focus on the cute little boy with the ruffles. Yeah. That's Waldo. So their other sons were important as well, but Waldo actually became a civil rights activist and one of the very first African Americans to serve on the Greensboro City Council. So, you know, obviously the influence that his parents had rippled down to him, and he also was instrumental in education and politics. So I think it's just, you know, just this really amazing family portrait of these folks that are, you know, because we talked about it, it was like, that's a lot of kids, you know. Kind of our first questions were like, you know, did this woman want to have that many kids? I mean, she has a senator as a husband, but she was very well educated herself. I even looked up a thing. She came from a well-to-do family, but she paid her way through college. And so she, you know, she wanted to do that for herself. So powerful, powerful family here.
And Dimitri, I have a quick question before we kind of look into the picture also. And then at that time, you know, the senators, we had so many Black senators and Black folks in high offices in the government. And, you know, can you tell us a little bit about that? Because even prior to this, we didn't we? And so
I'm gonna defer to, I know Kitsan knows a lot about this, so I'm gonna defer to Kitsan for this one.
Okay, I didn't mean to put you to spot.
No.
Yeah. You know, we had 10 years of directly after slavery. The Senate was full of Black people, all men, of course, but full of Black people. But pretty soon, the majority population said, this ain't gonna work after all. And so they ran them all out. In many cases, violently killed them, ran them out of town. You know, they did the normal running around terrorizing these senators and congressmen, I should say. And so 10 years later, there was no one left.
Also, to piggyback on that, Kitsan, they, in this case, he wasn't reelected simply because they began the process of disenfranchising Black voters.
Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
the gerrymandering really
And
did.
so, in addition to that sort of harassment and what have you, they began to,
That's
suppress the vote in other ways.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, I keep on going back to that dog at the bottom, and his tongue is kind of blurred, which tells you like longer exposure time, right? Like I think about that. But these kids are holding in place, just and you know, the dog is of course moving, but the kids holding in place, looking at the cat, it tells me like how important this photo is, and even getting ready, looking at the beautiful curls on the child at the, you know, above the father. It's just looking at all of this, and I wonder, you know, my imagination goes to getting ready for that photo, for that important photo, going to the studio and corralling all these kids and dressing them up, and these, I mean, all the outfits are on point. And I just think about that as a family, what the things that you go through to get ready and to kind of, you know, to get ready to go to the photo studio. And I know my family, you know, those that migrated to the US, we used to go to Sears, and we would have all these photos, and it just like that whole thing was a whole production. There was a whole production. My sister would do my hair, and so I think about that. I go even further in this photo to think about how did they get ready, and yeah.
There was a personal discovery I had when I looked at some of the photos after you sent them out.
Yeah.
And the name was very familiar, Faulkner, although because I do genealogy, ancestral, you know, research. And my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, was actually in this area and was an educator. And education was very important during this period, as I think Dimitri mentioned as well. My grandmother stayed with this family, and she was in the 1930 census along with my father when he was a child. They took in, I think, not boarders, but educators, that and other families. But it's their name is spelled different, but I did the research, and that was sort of like a personal surprise and discovery, is that these are the Faulkners that my grandmother stayed with. Yeah, and she was also an educator as well.
That's incredible. That's awesome. And I did not know that. And it's so nice to hear that.
But I think also that comes back to and underlines what it means to be Black family. You know what I'm saying? Because I think, you know, modern day interpretation of what family is, and what we've been allowed to have in terms of it being interpreted by other communities or other cultures, and saying, oh, that it's broken, or that it's this, or that it's that. But to start to see these pictures tell their own stories, and then hear provenance of, you know, families staying with families, and what that actually means in our culture.
I think also in activism, again, is what Dimitri said. They were very active in community. They were very, you know, and I think that presence in terms of lifting up community. So it was more than just talk, or more than just a presence, but it was actually doing the work.
Yeah. You know, and I think that's at the heart of Black culture is activism, isn't it? Really, it's like, I don't know that we get a choice. I think You know, I think we just have to be activated.
Mm. Yep. So okay, got to get ready for this next one. Kitson, I think this is yours. All right.
Oh, yes.
Yes, here they are.
Here they are.
Well, this is Eva Catherine Stewart Northrup on the right, and Alida Maud Stewart, her sister, on the left. And these are nieces of Harriet Tubman. This picture, we don't, as you see here, there's nothing about the picture, obviously. And some people have said they think this may have been taken around 1913, 1914, somewhere in that era. And there had been an information added to this photo at some point that indicated that these ladies had been at Woodrow Wilson's inauguration. However, that we don't believe that's really true, because Woodrow Wilson was a raging racist, and that would be unlikely. And also, I looked at some pictures. I found some pictures in the Library of Congress of Woodrow Wilson's inauguration, and I could zoom in, and there was not one Black person there at all. So I don't see that as true. But we can tell something about the time sort of based on their fashion, which they are wearing what it was then known as Merry Widow hats. And that was, they were made famous by a play called The Merry Widow. And the star of that play made these hats very popular. So these ladies were definitely dressed in their time. They were very, very current, very au courant. They've got the skirts on that have now got the waists at the normal place of a waist, rather than dropped or raised really high under the bust. So that tells us a time period as well. The long sleeve blouses with the fancy embroidery and accoutrement also tells us that around that's that time period. And also it tells us that these ladies had some means of some type, because they're dressed in, you know, what we would consider very fine clothes for that time, and very similar to the clothes that their white counterparts would have been wearing during this time as well.
Oh, wow.
By the time this photo was taken, of course, Harriet Tubman was dead, because she died in 1913. So we think that she was already gone. The other thing is there's literally no information about these ladies anywhere that I could find. Their progeny, one of them had a husband, obviously. So there's just no known, I couldn't find anything about them, actually. Although Harriet did have 3 brothers who lived, who undoubtedly at some point somebody got married, and then these are the young ladies. Their hair is also in the style of the day as well, and these kind of up sweeps that the major society was wearing. So they were very current. Their clothes look lovely, and what I would consider expensive for that time, and for them being young African-American women.
They're beautiful.
Yeah.
With these 20-inch waists. They got the hourglass figure for sure.
Well, they've got the corsets to help that, because people are still wearing corsets at this time, although they weren't as tight as they had been perhaps in the 450, you know, corsets were worn for 500 years. And not by these people, obviously, but corsets have been around for 500 years. So the corsets at this time were starting to get not quite so tight. They were starting to loosen a little bit, although I guess you can't really, they look very tight here.
Oh,
but yeah, they've got corsets on.
The hat reminds me, you mentioned knowing something about the hats. when I looked at one without the brim, it reminds me of sort of, I wonder if it was inspired by the African or Nigerian gele piece. It almost looks sort of like the full headdress that you would wear, aside from the rim.
Well, I would imagine that unless they made these hats were commercially purchased. So
right, it was just
I can't imagine that, but it's certainly possible.
If the hat maker was,
and of course she could have been doing her own thing. You know, her hat on the lady's hat on the right, you know, that hat could possibly be like the hat on the left, and she's just turned it, you know.
Oh yeah. Oh, I see the ribbon. Yeah.
That's also a possibility.
yeah.
I did find their hats to be the piece de la resistance, if I could say. That was their like style, their unique imprint that isn't so Eurocentric. Everything else reads as trying to meet white beauty ideals, except for the hat. For me, the hat has a flourish to it that maybe speaks to their African heritage, if I could say that.
It's possible, but if you look at Merry Widow hats at this time, you will see some hats that literally go on for days. They go up, they go out, then they go all the way. I mean, their hats were just, they were too much, really.
Wait, are we proposing a talk on hats?
A what?
I mean, I don't know.
Yes.
Could we entertain that? I think we should think about a whole show on a whole presentation on hats.
Well, after I was looking at this picture and looking up the Merry Widow hat and all that, and I thought, it took me right back to church ladies, and the hat thing in the African American church is just, it's over the moon. I mean, I have seen, oh my God. So I'm wondering if this, you know, certainly translated on further to now, you go to an Easter Sunday Black church service, you can barely see the pulpit for the hats. So
oh wow,
hats are a thing. Black people.
Hats are a thing. I think we're gonna have at least a couple of hats in every series. I can't promise that, but but you know, I have no segue to the next one. To be honest, it just I recently, you know, my dad joined the Ancestors recently, and these photos, the following photos, kind of make me very emotional. I'm not gonna lie, and so I'm just gonna hand it over to Charlie to just get us started with this one. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Sorry for my tardiness. I have literally no excuse, but we'll go on to this photograph here. This shows a photograph of Lieutenant Lawrence Leslie McVeigh, and he's holding up his son. And there's a couple of features about this that are just really wonderful. If you look at the very top of the photograph in pen, you can see that it says, you know, 10 months junior with daddy. And that's a photo of he and his son. And it's a really interesting photograph for a lot of reasons. For one thing, McVeigh was a war hero. He fought in the Harlem Hellfighters, and they were a fascinating group because during World War I, they didn't think that Black soldiers could fight along with white soldiers. And so basically they were assigned to the French. And so he fought with the French army and won the Croix de Guerre, which is the cross of the war cross for the French, and was would have won. This is actually a shot of the Croix de Guerre given by France. And he ended up getting a Purple Heart as well, which wasn't given to him until 1932, because post-war years, they didn't give Purple Hearts to Black soldiers. So it's something that his daughter and granddaughter had to fight for to make sure that he got it. And it's an interesting story because it reminds me of the story of Eugene Bullard, who was the first Black pilot. He went over to World War I to fight, quote unquote, for his country. His country wasn't really, that's not who I'm talking about, by the way, with this picture. This is another picture of McVeigh. But he went over to fight in World War I, and the American Army or American Air Force, I should say, wasn't really interested in having him. So he ended up becoming a pilot, and a very well-decorated pilot for the French, and ended up being very important with the start of the Tuskegee Airmen. So it's a similar type story where you're seeing Black military, I'll just put it in military because it's not just the Army and the Air Force, just being ignored, degraded. With McVeigh here, after the war, they were not given the kind of hero's welcome that most of the white troops were given. Whatever parade they had was really limited to Harlem and, you know, to a much smaller group of people. And he had sort of an unusual or unfortunate end to his life, and I couldn't get more information about it. But in 1968, he was beaten to death in a park, and I couldn't find anything. But I wanted to look at this picture in particular because I think it has some really interesting aspects to it. For one thing, I really liked the fact that he has this T-shirt that has a skull and crossbones on it. And there are a couple of pictures of him at the beach with his son. And coming from New York, I really was curious as to which beach this might be. My first thought was this might have been Coney Island. But I looked into it a little bit, and it seems to be that the popular spot for Blacks to go to the beach was Far Rockaway. That would have been the spot that people from Harlem, people from Manhattan would have gone to. And they would have had their own section of beach because, as you can imagine, beaches, like so many other things, were really strongly segregated. And in fact, there was a race riot in Chicago about this issue in particular, where I think it was a young man, he was already in the water and had inadvertently passed the point from where he was supposed to be swimming. And that ended up starting a race riot in Chicago. So it was a very significant distinction that people made at that time about where they could and couldn't swim. And that, you know, there's a whole politics of race, especially at that time when it comes to not only beaches, but swimming pools as well. So if you look at this photo, and then the photo, both of these photos, if you look at this, and then you look at the one that today just showed, and I really got up close and personal with my little magnifying glass. You know, all the faces that you see are Black faces. You don't see any white faces at all. And so, you know, it gives a significant statement on what was going on at that time. There's a famous painting by Reginald Marsh, who was white. But it was called something like, I want to say Negroes at Rockaway Beach or something like that, which again shows a segregated beach. And, you know, it's very typical Reginald Marsh style, but it's sort of an interesting painting to look at when thinking about these photos of him with his son at the beach. Other thoughts, you guys?
I just see how precious his son, like how precious, he looks so precious. He looks so proud. And I see V saying that seems like a very proud father. And that's what he looks like to me. And then to later learn, and I had no idea when we were looking at this photo, the backstory of the son. And so that it's just like layers of heartbreak and also just beauty and the openness that we see here, that inviting fatherly love that we see in this photo. And then to just learn about all these layers, God, you know, what is documented in photography and what moments are documented in kind of to stay still in photography. I think we all have photos of those moments, right? Of either a family member or someone that is in pure joy and pride. And so that's what I think about it. And yeah, Azizi says, Black fathers have always mattered, helps shatter that stereotype. Yeah.
Yeah,
Amen.
and because the quality of this photo is not necessarily clear, I hope everyone can appreciate that he's got his hands out to the camera. And it's in this sort of pose as though, here, come to me, come to my arms. It's really a lovely, lovely shot. And I love that striped shirt that he's wearing. It's just, you know, it speaks of a time and a place. So it's a beautiful photo.
It is. Oh, thanks, Charlie, for that. And yeah, we're gonna, if it's okay with everyone, I would like to keep you. This is our last talk for the year. I'd like to keep you for another few minutes. We have so many photos to share with you. And so, and this one, you know, yeah. Nicole, you want to get us started on this one?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So this one, it's a print. It's on a postcard. So on the other side, you'll learn more about the photograph. It was part of a contest, 1886 in Germany, and this was the winner. This was the winner of the contest, among others. Now, what's interesting about it is that this photo won for landscape, a landscape photo, right? Yes.
Oh, wow.
That's the first peculiar thing. The photographer titled this photo Niagara Falls. You know, I had the opportunity to visit Niagara Falls, and I gotta tell you, if I'm thinking of a landscape photo, I'm not necessarily thinking of this. So I'm thinking about the time, 1886, slavery has ended. I'm thinking about the location. This was a significant moment in history, a significant location as part of the Underground Railroad. And so perhaps, I don't know, I'd be curious to hear what people think about this being considered a landscape photograph. As for the family, again, I have questions because of the space. When you zoom out, you'll see clearly the center is this young male subject, although it's a little off center. There's movement of the group in front, the group in back. They are standing still for this photo, looks like.
I just think that's wild that it's called a landscape. Wow. And so my mind, like hearing that, my mind immediately goes to where they're not considered people, because in a landscape you don't have people as the center. You know, you may have animals or there may be a person in the background, but the landscape should be the key feature. But I won't go there too much. I won't go there.
It's odd. What's that? Because there's not even much landscape.
Yeah, you barely see it, and like if someone says,
so
yeah, it may be interpreted as a street scene, and you know, maybe this would have been very exotic in Germany in 1886. You know,
well, I'm sure that's true. I'm not sure it's true. Yeah, landscape.
Black people in Germany for a while.
Kevin says the same thing. Historically, the gaze of the white photographer simply objectifies people of color.
And Patricia says, I think it has, I'm sorry, I cut you off. No. I think it has also to do with with the housing. So I'm curious.
Inappropriate term though, landscaping for this, you know, cityscape or something, you know, I don't even know if that would be appropriate.
Or architectural.
Life or something, you know.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, I also wondered whether it was a comment on them saying, the Germans saying how their landscape was changing. Because this, for them, it's like, is outside of their normal, I don't know what just leave it there before I dig myself into a ditch that I don't want to be in. But
we'll dig you out. Don't worry about it. But you know, I love that we're also kind of, for me, this is not what a shift. When Nicole mentioned that, it was just like, I didn't even notice that much about the building or anything. My mind, my eyes directly went to you know, the families, or whose family, whose mother, whose sister, I don't know. This is, to me, it looks like a family. And my eyes directly went to the gentleman, the young boy that as Remy would put it, has the diasporic lean.
There we go.
You know, and so it's interesting how you frame it also is how you see it. The title, I think, you know, I had no idea. So immediately everything else was the background for me, whereas in this photo, when Nicole brought it up, and it's like the background is actually the central point. It's just like, whoa, okay. Yeah.
I think also, go ahead, Remy.
No, I was just also thinking about the overall idea of taking a photograph to enter it into a competition, because I think that's a slightly different activity than some of the older cataloging of us and mugshots to portraits, to then now, you know, telling this story about us to an unknown audience to win a competition. And so to me, it makes me wonder and think about the mindset of the photographer in this particular one, in terms of the title, in terms of the competition, and what that was about to achieve.
Tricia mentions I'm sorry, did you finish?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, mentions that the house that they're standing, or the home that they're standing in front of, has no windows compared to the one in the back.
I think also, you know, I was just gonna say, like, you know, taking the context of the photo out of the image, one of the things that strikes me is that pretty much everyone is smiling. And, you know, most of the photographs that we looked at in this series are of folks that are of much more financial means. You can tell by the clothing that, you know, that these folks are, you know, they're working class and they're just making it. But, you know, there's a sense of pride that still happens. And I think the young man at the center has, you know, like just that look on his face, the way he's composing his body and staring back at us, it just radiates pride to me. And so, you know, however the photographer's intention, whatever it may have been, or how the photograph's provenance and history, you know, for me, it's like it doesn't take away how they feel about themselves.
We definitely have seen photos though where you can clearly tell, you know, thank you for, I think it was Azizi that oh no, it was Kevin B that brought in, you know, they went there and they said National Geographic, hashtag National Geographic. And so we've seen those photos also, but this is different. Yeah.
I'm always a fan of photos with females. I'm partial, but with females that are happy, smiling. Yeah, sense of pride. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, Remy, I think this is for you. What do you think?
This is one of my favorites. Why? Because I feel like the taller girl on my right, your left, I feel it looks like me when I was a kid. I was like, okay, could have been me if in that time as well. But again, I think, you know, the reason why I like this is like I feel like looking at the fashions, you know, no matter whatever section of our society we've looked at through these photographs, whether it has been the upperly more mobile folks, or whether it's been the sharecroppers, or, you know, anyone in between in the middle, that we see that people were making the best of what they had. And when I look at the fashions, you know, these girls, you see her little shoes, and maybe there's a little knickerbocker underneath her dress, and they have these different prints of fabric. So even though maybe they didn't necessarily have a lot, but everybody is dressed differently as well. And the mom's hand, I'm assuming that she's the mom or the mother figure, her hand tenderly on the little girl's shoulder, you know, this just kind of connection. For me, that's why I love this particular photograph, the connection. This is what to me that says we are family. And I'm not going to sing it, trust me, you know.
I was waiting.
Sorry, that cracked
But,
me.
you know, again, just the way in which we choose to tell our stories under whatever circumstances we're in, how we show up for ourselves, how we try to present the best of ourselves under whatever circumstances we have found ourselves in. So for me, I love the little, the mom has this little kind of tie around her neck. The other daughter has this, you know, her little dress on as well. And again, I think, you know, this whole event of getting yourself ready to go to the photography studio. And it makes me wonder, when they went, how many photographs were taken in any series, and how the one we get to look at becomes the one we get to look at. I have no idea.
I did a little research on this photo because when I turned it over on the back, there was some information. The photographer himself was an immigrant from Scotland. When he was in Scotland, he was a kind of what we would call now a socialist. And when he came to America, he was an abolitionist and definitely believed in the commonality of all man, you know, regardless of race, believe it or not. He was a Civil War photographer. He then opened his own studio in Washington, D.C., which is where these ladies must have had their picture taken, because that's the only studio he ever had. And in that studio, his brother worked there and a few other photographers. So there's no guarantee that Alexander Gardner actually took the photo, but it was taken in his studio for sure. But on the back, this is a card to visit. And so it's a postcard, and on the back, there's a 2-cent stamp on it. So while this picture was taken in the 1800s, that stamp could not have been placed there until 1917, because that's when the 2-cent stamp became available. So it was sold in some gallery, or, you know, some place. This was sold way long after this picture had been taken. So that's what I have to add to that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And also, these children and this woman are 100% dressed in the style in which they're living. So these are not old clothes. The young ladies, the girls' clothes are absolutely also directly on point for the style and even the age, because the older girl, her dress is almost full length. It's much longer for her. And then the younger child, her dress is shorter, which was definitely the style of the day for children as well.
Oh, wow.
Oh. And beautiful.
It's gorgeous. And what did you tell Remy, what did you say the pants underneath the dress were?
Knickerbocker.
Oh,
Knickerbocker. Okay.
yeah,
That's new for me. Okay.
It was a great touch. I didn't know that word either.
Well, it's short, and they shortened it to knickers.
Oh, okay.
Of course, yeah.
Yes.
Well, okay.
Nice. So this one's mine, and I think all of us can notice that there's two photographs side by side, and what that means is that these were taken as a stereoscopic picture. And I think today we have a photo of what that machine would have looked like. And so it's the kind of thing that you would have put these double photos on a rack like that, and then these two little lenses would have actually amplified it, would have made it larger, but also because the photograph was taken at a very slightly different angle, it would give a 3D effect for people. And it's interesting, these were invented actually invented before photographs. Before even the advent of photography, and ophthalmologists were using these with drawings with just hand done things to test vision. And of course, it then later became added to photography. And then when Queen Victoria had hers taken, and there came one of these stereographs of Queen Victoria, it became a complete rage, and everyone had them. And again, think about it, in the 19th century, we didn't have TV, we didn't have even, maybe you had a piano, but you would certainly have one of these. And this became one of the big, just a really important entertainment for the family, and people would have hundreds of these and they would collect them. And I don't know, when I was a kid, I remember they had sort of a more recent, those little, I wish I could remember the name of the toy, you could
I can't remember it
click it, but they're a direct relative of these. But
oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's really fun. And if we could just go back to the photo for just a second. So this photo was taken in Haiti. And they think it was around 1880, so clearly after the revolution in Haiti. And what's interesting is that we have, these are now the ruling class, who tended to be mulatto. There was this very clear division, sort of class division between mulatto and freed enslaved, former slaves, and these would have been the ruling class. They almost always would have spoken in French as part of the ruling class. And you can tell that they're moneyed. I mean, if this is presumably their house, which I think we can assume, this is an awfully nice porch. They're wearing really, really nice clothing. And I love the two guys in the back with the hats. And I'm not sure, but because we see the one on our left holding up a gun, I wonder if they were even guards for the family. Oh, thank you. Someone wrote that the toy was called a Viewmaster. Yes, exactly. It was a Viewmaster. But you can tell that this is a blended family, or I should say a mulatto family, but very wealthy. The clothes, I think if we compare the clothes in this picture to the one that we just saw, we can see that there's a very big jump in class between this family here. And there, I love the details of it too. I love the hats that the two men in the back are wearing. Now, I don't know that they're guards. I'm just sort of throwing that out as a thought pattern, but you can assume that it's warm there. And yet, even though it's Haiti and warm weather, these two men are dressed in suits. And so you can imagine, you can feel the heat of this, session for them to pose for. It's really, it's an interesting photo.
Where was this taken? Do you know, Charlie?
1880.
Pardon?
1880.
And where?
Oh, where? Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's an interesting photograph. And again, interesting to think about where the class divisions would have been in Haiti at that time, because certainly the whites would have either been thrown out or killed, and by them I mean the French. It would have been the ruling power in Haiti before the revolution, and so these would have been probably half French or quarter French, and certainly would have been French speaking.
Oh, I have Charlie, I have another one that was taken, and I think we have to save it for another time, the black and white one. But we have about 3 photos. So how is everyone feeling? Should we go through them or save them for some other time? Or how are we feeling?
I'd definitely like to go through the one, not because you had assigned it to me, but because it's a local.
We're getting some thumbs up here from the group.
All right. Okay. All right. So. Awesome. Okay. I think
it looks like folks on all the platforms are sticking it through with us.
Just one grumpy guy in the back saying no mas, but everyone else is saying keep going.
Okay, this one is the local story. I'm sorry. Captain and Mrs. T. Shorey and family lived in Oakland, California. He was a whaling ship captain and went all over the world, hunting whales, killing whales, and bringing them back to Oakland, which was a big whaling port, unbeknownst to me. Started off in San Francisco, but that got really crowded, so they had to expand and ended up in whaling ships ended up coming into Oakland as well. That on the left is his daughter Zenobia, who got very ill on one of the voyages because he took his family on many of his voyages because he was going to be gone for years, so you know, a year or more. So he took his family oftentimes. And Zenobia was on one of the voyages when they were in the Hawaiian Islands and she became ill. And then shortly after they got home to Oakland, she died. The little baby in the middle is Victoria, who ended up becoming being very well versed in being a sailor, I guess, on the ship. She knew all the ropes, she knew how to do the sails, and not at this age, obviously. But ultimately, she became quite a little sailor on her own. She never had a ship or anything, but she followed in her father's footsteps. And his wife was Julia Ann Shelton, was from a very well-to-do family in San Francisco. And you know, they married. He was originally from Barbados, ran away from home at 14. His mother and father wanted him to be a plumber and had set him up for a plumber apprenticeship. And he said that wasn't getting it. And he ran away from home and took to sea and ended up on the East Coast, of course, because whaling, that was the big whaling area. And then ended up getting out to Oakland and becoming captain of his own ship. He lived in West Oakland on 28th Street, and the house his second house is still standing with a plaque in front of it, acknowledging the history of the house. He lived on a street before he moved to that street called Short Street, which ultimately they changed to Story Street, named ostensibly after him. And yeah, so that's his story. This picture, this photograph was he took it apparently with him on a voyage to Japan, which was a very, very rough and dangerous trip as it turned out. And they almost lost the ship. But while in Japan, a Japanese artist painted a portrait of this photo. And that portrait is in the Oakland Museum of California right now. I mean, it's not probably on show, you know, up on display, but they have the painting. And after he retired from shipping, he was very instrumental in the African-American business community in Oakland, supporting them. He ended up having a fundraising dinner for the Tuskegee Institute with Booker T. Washington in attendance. So yeah, he was a man about town. Wonderful. And he had a beautiful time. He had two more children who had died, two boys that died early, you know, in childhood.
Thank you, Kid-san. Oh my God, to think that we were going to end it without this photo. Wow. Yeah.
Piece of Oakland history. I love it. Beautiful family.
Look at that gorgeous dress, I guess, that she's wearing. I mean, it's just really remarkable how that collar goes all the way up to her neck. And then, you know, the top, I'm really bad at fashion detail, but, you know, that top part, how it goes to sort of halfway down her sleeve, it's really quite remarkable.
I think also the black and white contrast in this particular photograph is stunning, because you can see all the layers, the levels. You can see the furniture from her dress to his pocket watch. I mean, it just does it on so many levels aesthetically as well.
Oh, that the little child holding her dad's is that a watch chain kind of thing? Oh, that is just so adorable to me.
What a beautiful family.
Yeah, what a beautiful family. What a beautiful photo. We brought it home. So I think this is a good place to end our program today. And I thank you so much. We went on for an hour and a half, and this is a record. And I think, you know, for the end of the year, it was well, well planned out. And I think, you know, I would like to ask folks to become members, to support us so we can keep on bringing these programs to you. I have the deepest gratitude to all of my colleagues and the docents. I am so grateful. I learned so much from you, and we'll be back again in mid-January, and I hope all the folks will join us again. And also, thank you for participating. We appreciate your participation, your thoughts. We learn from you just as much as you learn from us, if not more. So thank you so much. And I would like to thank our sponsors and donors. And please become a member of MoAD. Join us in these conversations. Keep in touch with us, and happy all holidays. I want to wish everyone happy holidays, and we'll see you in about a month. Yeah. Docents, I'll see you on the Monday meeting link. Yeah.